start recording. There we go. All right. And so this is kind of where we're at, right? We want to kind of get in here, and we really just want to start to be able to finish retopologizing the body on this guy. We've already got a pretty good start for most of it, right? Remember, we can always use the annotate right there, right? You always want to make sure to go select your retopo mesh, right? To make sure it's ready to go. And if you're in object mode, right, you can grab the object and it selects it. What you'll see is when you're in object mode, you get this, right? And that's great for when you want to actually quickly just start to draw a new object on the surface and have it be its own object. We saw that with the armor, the gear, right? But in this case, I want to actually edit what I already have. So I go to, like, say, 2 for edge mode, because usually you're doing stuff to edges in retopologizing. And now we see that, of course, our edit stuff up is, all of our normal modeling tools are available and will work. And we see that this menu once again changes. Now, I like to have auto merge off, and if you've been doing some retopologizing, if that can sometimes stay on and affect things like your loop cut or possibly your knife. So Ryan, you might want to just double check that that's off. That might be making your knife act weird, the knife tool, right? Just little things like that. And of course, we can already see that the shrink wrap's on and it's already got the quad body, but I always like to come up here to reference object, quad body. And that's just making sure it's all ready and good to go for us to do our work. I usually like to have snap off as well, unless my shrink wrap behaves weird. Sometimes the shrink wrap, like 85% of the time, the shrink wrap does a great job. But there's like 10 or 15% of the time where it gets a little weird. And that's where I'm like, hey, I'm going to turn the snap tool on. Sometimes I'll help that can help a little bit in some certain situations. So the snap tool is usually on by default, but I find shrink wrap works better or more reliably most of the time with that off. So I usually just turn that off. But occasionally I have found that shrink wrap gets weird, and that turning snap tool on can help. So remember, you have your snap. It's the magnet up here. And, of course, you can switch to different snapping options. These will all work with your retopo as well. Remember, Blender has pretty good snapping tools. So yeah, just kind of some quick reminders of some of that stuff and how you want to get set up, right? And obviously you've already had a couple of videos on this now, so it never hurts to reinforce, though. And so that's kind of where we're at now, is we just need to kind of go in here and keep working to add and to bring stuff together. So one of the things I really want to do right now is just start to kind of bring together some of these parts here that we need to connect up, right? So I'll do a little bit of work here, and then I'll probably do a little more with the annotate here and here just to kind of show that stuff off again. But it's really going to be a combination of just your normal modeling tools and a little bit of the annotate add B surface feature. In this case, I just need to add a little more geometry up here, right? It kind of looks like this quad could go to those two and those two. So I really feel like I should use a little more here. So Alt-C, right? That's just our loop cut. And I can just loop cut right in there. And remember, the shrink wrap keeps it sticking to the surface. That's what's cool about shrink wrap. So now we've got that in there. Of course, I could switch to Q for my, in this case, it's my tweak tool. Remember, I have it actually set to a mouse button, right? Because I've got a 5-button mouse here. My one at home, though, is actually got them on both on the left side by the thumb, which I prefer. But remember, Q toggles you through all your selection types. And whatever your last one was, it'll go back to that. So if you don't have a 5-button mouse, remember, just the actual workflow for how this works also is actually excellent. It's just, if you can put it on a mouse button, that's really cool. It's kind of like, I think that's the ideal, but even without that, you still have a pretty awesome workflow for that. So I can just tweak those a little bit if I wanted to. And then, of course, I can select those two edges and those two edges. And we could, of course, right-click, bridge edge loops. In this case, remember, I've already assigned a quick key to that because bridge is very useful, and I use it all the time for a lot of modeling. So I have a quick key assigned to it, but by default, it doesn't. But if you right-click, your edge context menu comes up, and you can bridge edge loops. And you see how that allows us to start to connect these together. So that's kind of a big part of what we can start to do here, right? Is start to kind of bring these all together, tweak the shapes to get the forms better. I really feel like I could use an extra edge loop here, so Alt-C for loop cut. Boom. And you see how it follows the contour of the shape, right? So keep that in mind, right? I can go to 2 for edge mode again, and actually I think we're still in edge mode. We can always hit Q to go back to tweak tool. Because remember, Blender's actually pretty good about staying in the selection type no matter what tool you're using. And that's one of the things that once I got used to it, I absolutely fell in love with it. It's a smidge different than it is in other packages. Not radically, but a bit. But it's just got that nice kind of consistent functionality for it, which is cool. All right, so I can just right-click, and we could do bridge edge loops again. Now, of course, if you go down here, there is the options for bridge edge loops. You can open it up. Now, we don't need to do it here, but you'll notice you can do number of cuts if you wanted to. Of course, we could just do some loop cuts if we wanted to as well. Not a big deal. But I just want to remind you there are actually options in here, right? You can play with different profile shapes if you want to, play around with the smoothness of it, twist it, or just add number of cuts, right? So just keep that in mind, right? The bridge has those. But it is pretty easy just to bridge and then just loop cut, Alt-C for loop cut, and then put a few edge loops in there. Hit Q to go back to selection tool, and we can tweak this a little bit. And now you see how we just have a lot more to start to fill these in, right? So I could easily just grab that edge, and I'm just going to use my shortest path quick key, right? Remember, though, that is in select. Select linked shortest path, right? It always takes me a minute to find it because I already have a quick key set up for it, so I just go by the quick key. Remember, this is one of those features that's actually quite useful, but does not have a default quick key. There's just no software I've ever used has a default quick key for everything, right? So that is one you'll probably have to add on your own. Remember, right-click, and then you could either, if you haven't assigned anything, it'll say assign shortcut. If you have, you can change it. That's how easy it is in Blender, which is great. But remember, in the select menu, select linked shortest path. Linked does, remember, that's selecting all the connected elements. It could be in edge mode, vertex mode, or face mode. But anything that's connected in some way, shape, or form to something else, like directly welded to merge at the vertex level, it'll select that. That quick key by default is right bracket, but that's kind of way over my keyboard, so I just picked spacebar. So I can right-click, and I could bridge edge loops, and there we go. Now, this is a case where this really looks like this could be merged together. So I could go to 1 for vertex, and if you want to, you could turn auto merge on. Now, you notice auto merge is an actual feature in Blender outside of ever having speed retopo. If you don't install speed retopo, you will still have that option up there with options right here for the merge threshold and all that stuff. So this is very much a feature that you have in Blender, period. It's just that speed retopo puts it right there as an option for you. And we just drag this in, and it's a little bit unreliable in my opinion, but it's still can be useful, right? So you can always kind of just do little auto merges like that. I like to have it off so I'm not merging stuff accidentally that I don't want to just because I got it too close to something else. But there is auto merge, right? And of course, you can always select a couple of vertices, right? And if you right-click, vertex context menu, you have merge vertices down here, and you have lots of great options. If you wanted to use a distance, you could do that. But you can also merge to the first selected, the last selected, to the center, to the cursor, collapse. So once you actually start to see that merge vertice options, it's quite robust. It's one of those things I spent enough time with Blender now to know how, particularly the 2.8 series and above, with industry compatible on, is just honestly quite impressive. I was not a Blender user, a serious Blender user until about a year ago. Great rebuild for them. But you can see that we're starting to kind of get this filled in, and you see the advantages to retopologizing, right? This section we couldn't quite build, right? The loops were going to go this way, right? This is why we're retopologizing some of these parts, because there are elements you're going to build on a character and creature that aren't going to follow the more linear structure that box modeling uses, right? When you're just taking a cube, putting some edge loops on through loop cut, and extruding appendages off like horns, ears, wings, legs, fingers, toes, naturally those have a linear structure and a linear edge loop form, and that's quite a bit of a character. That's why you can box model most of your character pretty easily if you've got a good box modeling method. We even saw that inset and extrusion worked great for creating the radial patterns for the eyes and the mouth. But we are seeing that certain sections and certain elements of the way you're going to design a character creature are not going to follow a linear structure, right? They're going to get weird. They're going to go at a diagonal angle. And that's where just being able to sculpt sometimes and focus on the form and then come back and rebuild that topology later on is super useful. There are automated tools. Technically, ZBrush has some of its own. You'd have to go kind of into the brush I'm trying to remember where it's at, but it's like in the object properties. I think we'd have to be like in sculpt or something like that. In fact, I think if we hit 5 for sculpt, we'll see it. Yeah. So when you hit 5 for sculpt, you'll see there's Dino Topo and Remesh. this actually gives you some of the functionality that you would find in ZBrush for these things. So if you just want to block in without box modeling, you can. But automated meshing tools just aren't spectacular, even ZBrush's. And it's so easy and precise to block in with a good box modeling feature that for me, I've just found I would prefer to box model what I can, then do a sculpt pass for the handful of weird sections I want and broad shapes and forms, and then just spend a little bit of time doing some manual retopo. And that's exactly what we're doing here, right? So much of the box modeling worked to give us the edge loops we wanted, and it's just some of the weird areas that we want to fix up. And that's kind of where we're at, right? Is just kind of starting to reconnect these up, figure out where we want them to go together. Of course, we can slide, and we can even hit 5 for a sculpt, right? And if you have grab on, right, remember you can just grab to move these around, right? And you can even hold down shift to smooth them. And shrink wrap is going to follow this, right? So these sculpting tools work pretty well with your shrink wrap. And so it can be really easy to come in here and do some nice little adjustments at a broader level with something like, just say, your grab tool. Grab tool is a lot like a move tool based on just kind of grabbing kind of a vertex in the area, right? You can even have it do grab silhouette now for like really thin areas like fingers and stuff like that. Grab active vertex, right? There's a couple of cool features there. But by default, it actually works pretty great on its own. But it's like a move tool, right? It kind of selects what's under the brush and just lets you kind of move it. But it's sculpting, so it's based on how the brush size, kind of like soft selection would be, right? Well, we'd have to be in regular mode, 2 for edge mode. Proportional modeling, right? Proportional editing fall-off is kind of like that. But I like the sculpt because you can smooth and things like that. But your sculpting tools work with shrink wrap also. So if you hit 5, you go to sculpt. And in particular at this stage, you're really just going to use grab, right? You have that great option, right? It can be cool to like do some shaping with it, right? Like, oh, I want to pull this over here a little bit. I want to pull that over there, and then maybe smooth it a little bit. There we go. So it can be a great way to kind of do some great little quick shape adjustments in areas, or smooth out areas that are troublesome. So 2 for edge mode. And that's how easy it is to go from sculpt back to your normal edit modes, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 are vertex, edge, face, object, and of course 5 is sculpt. In particular, if you're using industry compatible. But you'll see right up here edit mode, and you can see most of them there. You don't see 2 and 3 to see edit mode, which is 1. But 2 and 3 switch to the face, edges, and faces of edit mode. So there we go. Now we can see here that I do actually basically have 3 edges to 3 edges. So that could be something that I could pretty easily just start to combine up here a little bit if I wanted to. Right? So we could easily just, in this case, I think I'll just grab these 2 edges and these 2 edges. Right-click, bridge edge loops. Right? And then, of course, Alt-C for loop cut. And that will allow me to put a little extra edge loop in there. Q to go back to our regular selection tool, and then we could select these 2. Right-click, bridge edges, and it automatically bridges and merges those together. And then I can hit 5 for sculpting again. I could smooth this area out. So you see how great sometimes just hitting 5 for sculpt and turning on your grab tool is, right? Because it's just going to allow you to go in here and just kind of move some of these around. You hold down shift and it allows you to smooth. But you'll see how this actually does a pretty good job of following and staying on the shrink wrap. Sometimes the smooth can overdo it, so be somewhat careful with the smooth, right? And occasionally it'll get a little weird, right? I've occasionally found it getting a little weird in certain spots, but it's still really, really useful. I use it often to make adjustments, but that can be quite useful for doing some cool little adjustments for right here to make that a little bit more smooth. All right. So we can see that, we're kind of now getting this nice kind of edge flow that's going through here. It could start to meet up with some of these areas if we wanted it to, right? So we could easily start to, say, grab those 2 edges, right-click, bridge edge loops. I could probably grab that one to bridge, right? And I could always go back in here and tweak some edges to kind of get them a little thicker, even switch back to vertex mode. And slowly you see how we can kind of start to make these adjustments to fit everything. Alt-C for loop cut, so I can kind of get a little more of a loop in there. Go back to Q, select those two. Right click, bridge edge loops. And then of course if we wanted to, we could easily start to connect these up, right? Now if we wanted to put an extra loop in here, we could, right? So Alt-C for loop cut, just to get a little line there. Q for selection, we could do a little tweaking. And then of course this edge and this edge can come together. We'll leave this as a triangle for now, we'll take care of it later. Right click, bridge edge loops. And then of course these could be bridged right here, right? Right click, bridge edge loops. And sometimes if you have a triangle gap, that's okay. We can always kind of come back and adjust it later on. So don't always worry about every little part at this exact moment. You can always say, hey, I'm going to work on another part, and then I'll come back to this. But actually, we could fix it right now, so we're just in these. And this is where it gets a little tricky, right, guys? This is where, when you start to get to the sculpt phase, I did it kind of on a couple of different parts of my model. I'm experienced with this. If you just want to kind of do it just on one section, like give your character a unique brow ridge that's not exactly something you could box model, do that and then just retop of that section. Because whereas when I show you guys box modeling, I could say extrude exactly this polygon, extrude exactly this polygon after you've done the smooth, getting your fingers, toes, and wherever you want your eyes and your mouth are, inset those polygons. When it comes to retopologizing, it is a bit of how do you fit the pieces of the puzzle together, right? Retopologizing isn't faster or easier than box modeling. It just allows you to develop certain forms a little bit easier without having to figure out the edge loop structure, right? So you can focus on sometimes just getting the form you want and then say, okay, now let's worry about the edge loops later on. But it still takes some time, right? So 3 for face mode. I'm going to grab this face, delete faces, and now I can just go to Alt-C for loop cut, boom, because I could probably use it later on through here. Hit Q to go back to my selection tool, and now you see I've got 2 edges to 2 edges, and I can bridge those, and now that quad's gone. Of course, I get 5 for grab, and I can do a little bit of shift for smooth, just to kind of make some minor adjustments to that. And you see how you can get that kind of nice and just less bunched up, more uniformly spaced. It's always a good idea to have reasonably good uniform spacing on your character creature. But you notice how it starts to kind of all come together. So I'm going to go back to 2 for edge mode. It's starting to come together that we've got this nice flow going through and connecting here. Now, before we finish up here, I'm just going to do a little more with the annotate, just to kind of remind you guys how to use that. And one of the things we could do, of course, is hit D for annotate, right? But it is one of your normal modeling tools, so it's right here. And I'm just going to kind of just come in here and just do a left click, drag, draw to kind of get myself kind of a little bit of a curve loop in here, right? And then I'm going to do another one kind of on the inside, but you see how I started it from the same direction? There we go. Now I'm going to hit Q to go back to my regular selection tool, 1 for vertex. And remember, I can select the vertex here, go to here, because sometimes if you pick shortest path, it might kind of go back this way, right? So you have to be careful that shortest path is trying to find the shortest path there. So sometimes you have to kind of pick a couple on the path, right? Shortest path, and go there, shortest path. So sometimes you just have to kind of pick a couple along there. But because I drew this one first, because that's kind of going to be the next one it's going to connect to, and then this one, so you kind of draw it in the order you want them to bridge, if you will. And you also start the curves from the same direction. And then I select the vertices around there, and we go to add B surface. What it's going to do is it's going to do exactly that. Now, it got a little weird at the end. I can always delete those, right? Also, you see how everything gives flat shaded again, so recalculate normals. And I'm just going to delete those two because those got a little weird. Shift delete. But once again, you see how that annotate brush can be a cool, fast way to kind of build certain parts of your models. And you notice how you can actually have your vertices kind of follow and do that connection also. So kind of neat how that annotate brush works. And then you see how we can kind of start to, bridge these together, right? Right click, bridge edge loops. And you see how you can start to slowly build up this ear kind of structured radial pattern that you want for it, right? Maybe 2 for edge mode to kind of bring these out a little bit more. And so sometimes it gets a little weird. So if you turn on snap tool, you might find that it behaves itself a little better. So like I said, sometimes in these areas, you might want to make sure your snap tool's on. And you could also do closest or active or median or something like that. You can always switch around some stuff. I kind of tend to find median can work a little bit better, but it's kind of up to you. But see how in this case, the snap is actually working a little better in this area, right? I have occasionally found that in really, really tight areas, the shrink wrap gets that have like a sharp cut in, like an ear would, right, for the shape. Sometimes the shrink wrap can behave a little weird, and that's where I turn my snap tools on. But you see how that annotate comes together to do its own cool little things. All right, I think that'll be a great place to stop, and we'll, of course, do some more tomorrow. But, you know, it's a little bit past 9:30. But I'm just really trying to show you guys most of your normal tools work with this, and we've just got things like shrink wrap on, as well as mirror. And, you know, we're just making sure that the body itself is the reference, whereas the retopo is what we're actually rebuilding. And it's just getting used to this functionality and this little interface that you get from getting the add-on. But annotates in Blender on its own. All these tools are in there on its own. Really, Speed Retopo is just a nice interface to automate and get you there quicker, basically. But even if you don't have this stuff's all there. You just have to go and turn a lot of these things on yourself. Whereas this kind of gives you a nice little interface for it, right? And that's what's cool about Speed Retopo. But this stuff's actually basically all inside of Blender already. Just needed a better interface around it. It's kind of like BPainter for texturing, right? It's really doing mostly stuff Blender already does. It's just to build a nice interface around it, right? All right, so I'm going to save that, and I'm going to stop recording.